Oh. Hi. Great. So let me spend a few minutes on what the Stanford Distributed Trust Initiative is, and then I was hoping to touch upon some general questions about security and privacy. First of all, I'd like to, this clicker is not working. Next slide, please. So I'd like to thank Brill and Humphrey for, again, doing an excellent job at bringing together the community and organizing this event. Next slide, please. One of the things that was apparent at Stanford is that we have amazing people in different departments, whether it's computer science or mathematics or economics or generally the School of Engineering and the School of Medicine. So I thought it was important to have an object in place designed to bring the communities together internal to the university and also build structures that allow industry to work with students and postdocs and faculty at Stanford. So the brief of the Stanford DTI is to explore the implications of blockchains for a variety of verticals, whether in fintech or economics or in healthcare or in other areas. One of the things that's apparent right now in the entirety of the blockchain space is there are remarkably few viable businesses defined traditionally. From the standard old-fashioned viewpoint of what's their product, what's their business model, what's their revenue like, how many users do they have, or how many customers do they have. And digging into some of the issues in the blockchain space, here's the table we use in my class to basically evaluate some of the blockchain technologies or companies. First question is, do you really need your own blockchain? Why not just use Neo or Ethereum? In many cases, a plain old database would be better. It may be unclear how you're incentivizing miners or validators. Worst possible thing is you code your own hash, which is a big red flag. You make things too complicated. You use non-standard logic or alphabets. Please. You propose to build products that are completely impossible to build, free, frictionless, perfectly scalable, non-energy consuming, completely secure protocols. Or, of course, you throw really complicated cryptographic techniques unnecessarily at silly things like online fantasy football gaming. It does really not need to be quantum proof. So here it's just some of the issues, or correct me if I'm wrong, but that seems like the sort of thing where even some of the basics are more than sufficient. So here are some of the issues in the field right now. And you might wonder, Jan, like, how come you're interested in this area? Why are you spending your time on this? And if you look back in the history of computers or technology or cryptography, of course, there's been an incredibly long list of naysayers. Classic examples are the telephone is not particularly useful. World market for computers is maybe not more than 5. Microsoft CTO predicting the death of Apple in 1997, and there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home, 1977. So the technology crowd and the computer crowd has had a long string of horrible mispredictions, and so this teaches us humility in the face of new technology. But what really gets me excited about blockchains in general is that if you look at a lot of the transactions that define people's lives, we have to trust someone or something or some company or some technology hundreds of times a day. Where do we get our news? How do we buy stuff? Who do we communicate with online? Where is this ad coming from? How do I pay for this service? Do I really own this house? Should I trust this doctor? Should I trust this pharmaceuticals company? And there's hundreds of things we do every single day that somehow involves us trusting someone. So what's really exciting for me about blockchain is that it is a technology that gets at how to scale trust? How do you distribute trust? How do you democratize trust? And so that's the fundamental motivation for why I'm involved, and presumably lots of other people in this room may be excited about similar things. Okay. So everyone in this room probably really cares about security, privacy, and anonymity, right? That's almost a given. You're probably a technologist and you really care about this. And you would naively imagine that everyone else also cares about security, privacy, and anonymity, especially because 2017, 2018, we've had a long string of big breaches, whether it's 143 million Americans. Most people in this room, your social security number has been leaked in concert with your home address and many other information about you. You would imagine, given all these newspaper headlines, that everyone in the US would be very sensitized to issues surrounding who owns the data, who controls the data, how is it encrypted, who's accessing it. But if you look at what people actually do, the situation is much more confusing. First of all, Equifax stock has largely recovered despite them losing their CEO. So they're sort of where they were last year. And if you ask people, if you ask a normal person, do you care about privacy and security? They say, of course I do. And then if you ask them, well, how much would you actually pay for it if I give you $1, $5, $10? At which point does a typical person give you all their secrets and all their information? And to a first approximation, the number is about $10. So if I go to someone and say, hey, here's $10, here's 2 pieces of pizza, will you tell me everything about you? And many people will then start to give you an amazing amount of information. So for everyone in this room, coming from a technology background and presumably having strong opinions about privacy and security and so forth, it's important to keep in mind that a lot of quote-unquote normal people, like my mother, for example, if I ask her, oh, how much would you pay for privacy or security, the number is remarkably small. Let's look, and indeed, blockchain is not the first technology on the horizon that, at least in principle, offers more security and privacy, right? There's a lot of technologies that people can already use today, but they typically don't. So if you think about the like browsers, you can get secure browsers, you can get secure messaging systems, truly secure social networking, that's in its infancy. You can certainly get secure alternatives to Dropbox and so forth. But very few people use them because either they have to pay for them or they're slightly more cumbersome to use. So unfortunately, there are secure alternatives available to most products many people use, but they remain niche products. Let's look at one very specific business model, and I won't name names here, but let's look at a business model in like DNA ancestry. So you go to a party, you put your DNA in some little container, you send off your DNA, and let's see what actually happens here. So in this general business model, people send their DNA and $100 to a company. The company returns information about your ancestry, like you're 32% alien or whatever the number is. The company then proceeds to keep your genome data, which is interesting, and then of course sells that information to the pharmaceuticals industry. So this is really interesting. So we live in a world where individuals will send their DNA to some company and give the company money, which the company uses to sequence the DNA, and then to sell the information to the pharmaceuticals industry, which is the business model. And the whole system works because the company returns some information about your ancestry. So here's some really basic questions from a privacy or security or anonymity perspective. Like, why on earth do people do this? And why on earth are people paying the company to sequence the DNA, which the company then resells? What's the value about knowing about like your fraction alienness? That's only very briefly entertaining. Why does the company get to keep the genome information? And why does the company get to keep the proceeds from selling the information from the people? So those are some of the questions that you might naively ask when you look at this sort of business model. And this is doing very well. And this again reinforces the notion that a lot of individuals may have different priorities than many of us in this room. Just to throw that out there. I love what WIT does. I love homomorphic encryption. I love quantum resistant algorithms. But it is not at all guaranteed that privacy and security alone will drive adoption of blockchain technologies. There may be special use cases where this is true, but what's probably going to drive adoption of technologies much more are new business models and incentive engineering that you can do by virtue of making it very easy to issue complementary currencies. This is one example. So as you develop technologies and as you develop products and start companies, keep in mind that a value proposition of quote unquote just privacy and security may not be enough. Almost certainly you're going to want to think about how to incentivize certain behaviors or incentivize certain economics or marketplaces that you couldn't otherwise do. Here is one thing we'll touch upon in the panel, and I'll take questions now and then we'll have a short panel in a moment. Thank you.